Hello everyone and welcome back. This is the first video of my 5-part series about the entire history of the Earth. Let's dive in. Let's go back in time to 4,600 million years ago. At this time, the universe was already 9 billion years old and already in its mature form, with several galaxies scattered throughout the universe, each containing billions of stars and planets. Thousands of stars form in each galaxy every year, but let's go to a particular star that was forming at the time in the Milky Way galaxy. Our own sun. The sun formed the same way as all other stars do. It started out as a cloud of hydrogen gas that came together by gravity and became a huge spinning ball. The pressure at the core and the heat produced by gravitational energy were so high that the hydrogen atoms in the core started fusing into helium. In the process, a tiny bit of the atom's mass was converted into energy. So the sun became bright and hot, of course, with trillions of fusion reactions happening every second, and the extra heat accelerated the fusion process more, which made even more heat, and so on. This is why the sun has been getting hotter and brighter throughout its lifetime. In fact, when it formed, the sun was only 60% as bright as it is now. After the sun had formed, quite a bit of dust and other gases were left over. Gravity pulled together these leftovers, and they became everything else we see in the solar system. Planets, asteroids, dwarf planets, etc. One of these planets was Earth. If you were transported to the early Earth, you probably wouldn't even recognize it as Earth, and you would die within seconds. The gravitational energy of its formation had converted into heat, making Earth a ball of seething rocks, scorching deserts, volcanoes, and lava lakes. The gases pumped into the atmosphere by those volcanoes gave the Earth an atmosphere of poisonous gases like CO2 and ammonia. This actually made the sky a brownish-orange haze. Since the early solar system was filled with asteroids, Earth was pummeled by them constantly. Some of these asteroids carried water, which of course boiled into water vapor and added to the atmosphere's size. The temperature at the time was 500 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But 4,500 million years ago, when the Earth was only 100 million years old, something happened that would change it forever. But then, a rogue planet named Theia, which had been ejected from its home star, flew into our solar system and crashed into Earth. The two planets fused, and the debris from the collision became the moon. Since the debris from the collision was of course hot, and the gravitational energy of forming the moon made it even hotter, the moon was a seething ball of lava at first. It was extremely close to Earth, so you could see it 24/7, and it took up a large portion of the sky. Yes, the big orange thing in the background is the moon. Its gravity sped up the Earth's rotation, so a day was just 6 hours. After this, the Earth started cooling down as it lost its heat to space. All the lava in the crust, or the surface layer of the Earth, was solidifying, leading to a completely solidified crust around 4.2 billion years ago. As a result of processes that began with the energy of Theia's impact, the crust was broken up into puzzle pieces called tectonic plates that shifted and interacted on the great ocean of lava, called the mantle. Though the mantle has been cooling over time, it's still liquid lava today, and it will be until a couple billion years in the future. Now that it was cool enough, the water carrying some of the asteroids that were bombarding Earth became liquid, and the oceans were born, also around 4.2 billion years ago. However, the constant asteroid bombardment also created frequent natural disasters. This probably prevented life from coming into existence at the time. So up until now, there was only one type of crust, the oceanic crust, and of course, it lay beneath the covering of water that stretched across the globe, the ocean. However, a new type of crust formed out of the lava of undersea volcanoes around 4 billion years ago, the continental crust. As it was less dense than the oceanic crust, it was pushed up and emerged out of the oceans, forming the first continent. This marks the end of the Hadean Eon and the beginning of the Archean Eon. Around 4,000 million years ago, a new type of crust emerged out of the lava of undersea volcanoes, continental crust. It was less dense than oceanic crust, and so eventually rose above the oceanic crust and then the ocean itself. This is how the first continent formed, and it marks the end of the Hadean Eon and the beginning of the next Eon, the Archean Eon. Continental crust at the beginning of the Archean Eon covered only 1% of the Earth, but in the next few hundred million years, more continental crust will be produced until it covers about 30% of the Earth. Over millions of years, some chemicals in the ocean gradually started growing in complexity, and as they became more complex, some were able to chemically react and spontaneously form into organized structures called protocells. These protocells were structures enclosed in a layer of tough lipid molecules, with a system of proteins inside that could carry out basic self-sustaining functions, and a molecule called RNA that was like the software that gave instructions for the proteins to function. Some protocells were able to create copies of themselves out of materials in their environment. So, protocells spread throughout the oceans. But hang on. Complex molecules like proteins and RNA come in all kinds of varieties, only a few of which are able to form into organized self-sustaining structures like protocells. How then did it just happen to be that those rare protocell viable molecules came together so many times to form so many protocells? Well, they didn't have to. Even if the protocell viable complex molecules were rare, there were tons of complex molecules forming all over the oceans. So it's not a tall order that a few protocells formed. But remember what I said, that they could self-replicate? So protocells could turn non-viable complex molecules and other materials into new protocells. That's how they spread throughout the ocean. But you know how when you make a copy, it doesn't come out exactly the same? So protocells born with good variations were able to survive and reproduce more, and the ones with bad variations died out. As protocells started existing in different environments, this process called natural selection or evolution made protocells evolve into a variety of different forms in different places. The difference between protocells and true living things is that protocells were pretty simple and they did not really work against decay and disorder, so they could only survive in perfect environmental conditions. But when, by chance, a protocell was born with the ability to fully work against decay and disorder, it became the first life form. The cell is the structural and functional unit of life. So all life is either one cell or made of multiple cells. The first living thing was made of only one cell, and it was far simpler than even the simplest single-celled living things alive today. Every life form that has existed and will ever exist is descended from this individual. We really are all family. Soon the first life form reproduced. It didn't need to mate to reproduce. Mating only happens in more complex life forms like animals, plants, and fungi, none of which existed yet. Over millions of years, the descendants of the first life form spread across the globe, and many evolved with more complexity. Eventually, they split into two distinct divisions, archaea and bacteria. All the bacteria and archaea were microscopic, single-celled, and still lived in the ocean. The sky was still made of poisonous gases like ammonia and methane, and some of those gases mixed with the ocean, but the life forms of the time were okay with it. In fact, oxygen would be toxic to them. The living things of the time ate chemicals floating in the ocean or ate each other. 3,500 million years ago, a new information storing molecule evolved, DNA. Living things of this time all have their data in molecules of the coding RNA category, of which there are two types, main RNA and messenger RNA. Main RNA was the main information storing molecule, but when a part of the cell needed instructions, a protein system would create a strand of messenger RNA and then copy and paste the necessary instructions from the main RNA. Then the messenger RNA would be sent to whatever part of the cell asked for the information. Several things in the cell could be asking for information at once, so the main RNA itself can't go around delivering instructions one at a time to everything that asked for them. Instead, several messengers would be created, each one carrying a specific piece of information to deliver to a specific part of the cell. You see how this works? But RNA is pretty unstable and has a high chance of damage. Sure, DNA is more costly to produce and harder to replicate, but as many bacteria and archaea of the time were growing increasingly complex, the benefits of DNA for some creatures outweigh the drawbacks. We don't know whether DNA evolved first in a group of bacteria or a group of archaea, but we do know that in the following few hundred million years, DNA evolved several times in several groups of complex bacteria and archaea. Eventually, all life forms using main RNA to store information will either switch to DNA or starve to death as the more efficient DNA life forms eat up all the food. However, even DNA life forms get the messenger RNA. Think about it. DNA is super costly and hundreds of messenger RNAs are produced every minute in a cell. It would require tons of resources to use messenger DNA. Besides, RNA is unstable, but that's not a problem for messenger RNA. It's going to be thrown away after it's decoded by the part of the cell it was sent to anyway. 3,400 million years ago, a group of archaea evolved that could harness energy from the sun. They had a molecule called retinal that converted sunlight to heat, which stimulated the chemical reactions necessary for life. Retinal also made them purple. These purple archaea became so successful and common that the ocean back then was purple. 2,700 million years ago, the first life evolved to live on land, but we aren't sure if this land exploring group belonged to bacteria or archaea. Either way, this wasn't the only group of living things that ever evolved to live on land. Several groups of living things throughout the history of the Earth have moved to land. This group was just the first one. Also around 2,700 million years ago, the first cyanobacteria evolved. Cyanobacteria are a type of bacteria that are also able to harvest energy from the sun, except they do it with a different molecule, chlorophyll, which made them green in color. The cyanobacteria's chlorophyll was more efficient than the purple archaea's retinal. But remember what I said, that there was no oxygen in the atmosphere back then, and that it would have been toxic to the life forms at the time? Well, there was oxygen now. Cyanobacteria started out with a small population first, so nothing much happened. But their population size eventually grew exponentially. By 2,500 million years ago, they were so widespread that the whole ocean and some of the land was green. The oxygen level in the atmosphere rose quickly to over 25%. This was a catastrophe for all life forms at the time, including the cyanobacteria themselves, because they were running out of CO2 to absorb. As oxygen cools down the Earth, glaciers formed for the first time ever, though they were restricted to the polar area. And the toxic oxygen, combined with less CO2 and ammonia to breathe, combined with the global cooling, caused 99% of all life to die out. What comes next? Find out in part 2 of this series. Thanks for watching, everybody. Part 2 is coming out soon, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Bye, see you next time.